What's up, everybody? Celtics Talk podcast coming back out of summer hibernation. Felt like we were doing emergency pods every day at the start of the year. Kristaps Porzingis signing, Grant Williams' departure. We're going to get back into it, calling this a Emergen-Svi Pod after the Celtics sign Svi Mykhailiuk to fill out what feels like the end of their roster. Can he crack it? Can the 26-year-old forward find a way to get into the rotation and be a consistent presence? Called up my buddy Brian Robb from MassLive, trying to get some insight there. Where does the roster stand? How we feeling? Some other little things that have popped up along the way, but it really has been one of the quietest off seasons I can remember. It feels like the Celtics have always done something in August in recent years, the Kyrie trade or extending Rob and Marcus and all that. Celtics got their work done early, and now it's just sort of tinkering on the fringes. How are we feeling? We're doing something on the state of the fan this week, and curious what B-Robb thinks about where Celtics fans stand. A lot of success, really, since Brad Stevens took over, and missing the playoffs that first year. But the last decade has been decorated with a lot of deep surges, a trip to the finals. But how do fans feel, especially in a city where only championships seem to matter? So let's get into it. We're back, baby. It's time to roll. Let's get into it with B-Robb about the latest signing and all things else going on with the September Celtics. All right, B-Robb. I felt like we need to cap our little home and home because we spent a lot of time talking about the 14th and 15th roster spot on the Winning Plays podcast a week ago. And I'm not sure we even brought up Svi Mykhailiuk. Luke, because all the reporting had suggested that he was going to go overseas, so I think we kind of dismissed it. How you feeling?
Right, the offer was out there for a while, and then
right.
I think it was certainly several weeks. It came from European outlets, and then the longer it lasts, and then you hear they're working out these other guys. You're like, okay, he's obviously decided to go no here, but I don't know. I think this is probably good news that he said yes compared to some of the other guys they're working out, right?
Right, and I guess that's where I come down on it is that I think they put a high priority on offense. We know that if Joe Mazzulla is going to trust somebody, it's got to be someone that can shoot it. Can he be consistent enough to crack the rotation? Do you think there's any pathway to Svi being a rotation player in Boston?
I well, I think if Sam Hauser I think probably Sam Hauser has a massive shooting slump, right, and just is not the 40% 3-point shooter we saw pretty consistently for him last year. I think that's the entryway, because you look around the rest of the rotation, like you're not like Brissett's going to play. Rob Williams obviously is going to play plenty, like with Horford and Porzingis. Like that group is healthy in the front court. They're pretty much set there. And then, I don't think he's going to be playing over Peyton Pritchard in terms of just the skill set and the trust that Joe Mazzulla has in him. But there is an entryway. There's like plenty of different options for Joe Mazzulla at the 10th, 11th, 12th spots on this roster on any given night. And to be honest, the most direct pathway might just be injuries. And it's not a position where the Celtics have had a lot of injuries, and certainly they'll be in pretty big trouble if they have injuries at the wing, given Brown and Tatum's influence there. But at the same time, Joe Mazzulla loves shooting. And this guy has taken 63% of his attempts in the NBA from beyond the arc. So when you put those two together, Mykhailiuk is a guy who I think plays exactly the way they want to play for this next season.
Yeah, and I think when you look at some of the guys they brought in, like Lamar Stevens, and had a great mentality about how he approaches the game and defensively, but I just feel like if you're looking for an end of the bench guy, you needed to have shooting. And that's why TJ Warren was somewhat intriguing. But I'd much rather they roll the dice on a 26-year-old who at least showed some glimpse. Now, how much should I overreact to that? It's whatever it was, the 17 game sample at the end. Against,
a lot.
Really? Okay. No. I know it's Charlotte. I know it's easy to go chuck threes when the team is steamrolling towards another lottery pick. But I mean, he is young. It's funny because I sat there and I said, I don't want this stunting Hauser's development. They're practically the same age. They're 70 days apart, I think, in birthday. Is there any roadmap to Svi actually tapping into what he hasn't in like 6 other stops in the NBA?
You're right. It's like, who's this? Like, you're like, oh, how's this guy? This young, promising player played for 6 different teams in 6 years. And then you look at, okay, he's like a he's a 3-point shooter who up until last year was like shooting 32, 33%. Yep. And that's just not good enough to cut it in the NBA. And granted, he hasn't played for a lot of good teams, like almost any good team. I mean, he played for Toronto 1 year. He played for the Lakers, but they weren't great back when he was there. But then it's been, the Thunder, the Pistons, everyone just kind of takes a shot at him and being like, all right, this is a guy who takes a lot of threes who isn't making enough of them and isn't helping us out defensively. I think the good news for him here in Boston is that like this is easily going to be the best supporting cast of his life. And if he can somehow bottle up those 20 games in Charlotte and become that type of a potent threat, then like the quality of looks he's going to get here is going to, surpass anything he's seen before. So whether or not he can do enough in other facets of the game to get him to that, whether or not he can put up those high 30% from 3-point range for Joe to be like, okay, this is the guy that we can kind of trust for a bench boost here. That remains to be seen, but the formula is there for him just to take advantage of the 3-point shooting, because if you look just down the bench, certainly at the wing position outside of Hauser, there just isn't a lot of reliable shooters there.
If you can't shoot 40% with the looks you get here in Boston, it's just probably not going to work out for you, right? Like even Sam Hauser found out. I mean, that's what it was always weird to me that Sam faded as much as he did last year. I thought the numbers were great for the first half of the year. Obviously, he went into a couple shooting slumps, including one probably pre-Christmas. But I just think as long as you can consistently show that you can knock down shots, there's going to be a role for guys here. I don't know about both. I kept saying to myself, well, maybe if Jayson and Jalen's minutes come down this year, and then I started like cackling, laughing, like Joe's not going to play them 40 minutes each on a random November night because they want to be out there. And so, I don't know. I think it's tough, and it is interesting to me. I think the money would have probably been better overseas for a guy like this. But still want to chase that NBA dream, and he probably wants to hope that last 20 games in Charlotte wasn't a fluky thing. The one thing I do like about him, he can put the ball on the ground. Like he can attack closeouts. He can create a little bit off the dribble, something that maybe other shooters can't do on this team. So we'll see. I don't have huge hopes, but when 14th and the 15th guy on the roster, I don't get too crazily worked up. We did spend a good amount of time. How do you think? Do you think they add a 15th guy? Do you think there's obviously still some flexibility with the two non-guaranteed players. Like I think we went over this. We think Luke is safe, especially with the big situation. But Banton and he could be technically swapped out if they needed a different position or a different player there. Do you think are they done tinkering before camp?
No, I don't think they are. I think I think it would be silly. I mean, it would be understandable from a financial standpoint if they leave that 15th slot open, but I think with the injury, like legitimate concerns you have across this roster right now, from a depth perspective, whether it's the front court or even like Malcolm Brogdon, and that's another guy we didn't really talk about there. Like if he's not ready in camp, like that's another route for Mykhailiuk to have, like to sneak into the into the rotation early on. But yeah, I would not be surprised if they're bringing in a couple more veterans here or just a couple more younger guys to compete for that slot. And Blake Griffin is out there. I think he has the first dibs on that. But
I would agree. I'll put it this way. We talked a lot about that, and me, I've been screaming it all summer. I didn't think that if Blake was going to sign, it was going to be until this is what veterans do. They don't want to go through training camp. You want an extended summer. He's the type of dude that's going to work himself into shape if he wants it. I think the ball is in Luke's court right now. I've been kind of told that, Luke, I keep calling him Luke. Mykhailiuk is on my mind. Then there's Luke Cornett.
Luke Griffin.
I mean, now I got Blake Griffin. I don't know why I keep saying Luke. Maybe that doesn't bode well for Luke Cornett, that he's on my mind as much as he is. But I think Blake wants to spend some time with his family and maybe determine what his path is. He's not going to lack for options. Teams know that he can help them. The Celtics know full well. And so I think they'll keep that spot kind of there for him. And we'll see as we get closer, maybe even into the season, if it takes that long. I think Blake's got to decide, does he want to go through the grind again? But I thought it was telling, I wrote about this a couple weeks ago because he was, when we were in that locker room after Game 7, I thought it was very telling. Like every guy went up to him. He mattered it, from the bus one boys to Tatum, he was a really good locker room presence. And as you said, they sort of need one more big. When Brad was leaving Las Vegas, I think he told you guys, we need, a wing. Okay. You got that with Svi. And they were looking for maybe a 4-5 type. Well, there's Blake. And, you got to throw him into a lot of games last year, especially back-to-backs when you needed another body. I think it would be a real luxury for both sides if that comes through at some point. When's their first back-to-back? It's probably like, late October, early November, or whatever. So we'll see how long they keep that spot warm. But I'm with you. I think they need one more big, just in case Luke Cornett turns an ankle in training camp again, and to maybe weather that storm.
And like to your point, in terms of the respect he command in the locker room, like you could use the vibes after you had a pretty big overhaul in the locker room between Marcus Smart and Grant Williams heading out the door. And I don't think there's anyone who would get a negative review of Blake in terms of his impact there, across guy 1 through 15. So, yeah, like they'll wait him out there. But I still think, even if you do sign him, it's like that's still not stopping them from adding another, whether it's any of these guys they've been working out, or some of another ilk, because Banton's got like a $75,000 guarantee. Right. Like that's a situation where if you like what you see out of Mykhailiuk, and everyone else is healthy in the backcourt, it's like, okay, do we, I'm sure they like him, but I don't think he's guaranteed a 15-man roster spot if they find an upgrade for other parts of the roster, feel better about their election there. And so, but that's something that, training camp will tell the tale on that. But I do think that, I'd be shocked if they go into next season without adding another big, whether it's Blake or I just looked at a list of bigs in the free agent market. And it's like Blake's your ideal choice right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's why you keep that spot warm as long as possible, because there's not a lot of options. You did, I think on your pod we brought it up, maybe that final two-way spot's a big, someone that you can just sort of draft up if you need to. Maybe that, again, you get through the early part of the season. Maybe if Blake doesn't want to come back until February, or these are just things that run through my mind about how it could play out. But certainly I think you're most beneficial, especially when you start thinking about 13 back-to-backs or whatever that number is. Having that just one extra big that you can really lean on. And Cornett's going to get plenty of time as well. And I think he's important here. And that's why whenever we talk about non-guaranteed guys, I don't really bring him in. I think it's more on Banton to prove he deserves a spot and he can be flexible and maybe handle the ball at times. And but yeah, it'll be interesting to see once we get into camp. Speaking of getting into camp, Celtics put out a press release a couple weeks ago saying, Porzingis is going to take some time off, not playing this FIBA championship, which, sitting out that event for some guys is very tough. But Brad Stevens coming out on the radio this week and saying, not a concern at all. No concern.
Nothing to see.
Nothing to see here, which is always it actually makes me more worried because that's when the things go awry. But, I think we both had said, a couple weeks ago that we weren't overly concerned about this injury, that it didn't feel like the Celtics were overly concerned. Did it make you feel any better to hear Brad be as demonstrative about hey, no big deal? Or should I be even more concerned now?
Yeah, it's you don't want to look at the Celtics history of the last 15 years of them trying to throw cold water over any concerns for big men. But with that said, I do think the situation here with Porzingis, him coming out and saying he's gonna be ready for day one of camp, kind of stood out to me of being oh, okay, you definitely didn't have to say that, but he threw that out there, and I think Celtics fans could have looked at this glass half full, glass half empty part of the injury of all right, if you empty part of a guy having player fascia, that's obviously not good news. The Celtics didn't know about this when they traded for him, right. Not great. At the same time, is this excuse to get him out of the World Cup? Was this a sneaky way of being because obviously any player probably has at least some remnants of this, and so for him to be all right, we know you want to play this, we don't want to make you look bad, but here's all right, this is a quote unquote legitimate injury here, so why don't you get off your feet here, because guess what, we gave you that extension, and we're probably gonna be playing, you're gonna be playing longer this season than you have ever in your career. So that's kind of the aura I got from Brad coming out and saying that in that interview. I feel
and I wonder if it's so weird. What is Danilo Gallinari's lasting impact on the Boston Celtics? He didn't play a game. He was around. He taught them a lesson about how you have to tread a little cautiously when you have these lofty goals. And it's one thing to tell Danilo Gallinari on a mid-level deal okay, go play. We know it means something to you. It's another when you sign a guy up for a 2-year extension and paying him $30 million. I do think, and look, credit to Porzingis, because I think that's really, really tough for a guy like that, who, Latvia is a very good team this year.
They're playing great.
They take out France in that little for pool play. Those games mean something to those players. And I always, because people don't understand, because the U.S. players are sort of sometimes indifferent to it. And it's so rare that Celtics now with Jayson and Jalen, maybe that will change. But this stuff matters to those guys, and they want to be there, and they'll blow out an ACL trying to play really good in these games. And yeah, you sometimes just got to be cautious. And so I think it speaks highly of what Porzingis knows his role and what the potential here is. And I think it's, good on the Celtics for probably applying a little bit of pressure to sort of say hey, we've invested in you and we've got big hopes. These windows aren't guaranteed, and you just can't mess around with it. And so good for both sides to kind of tread right here, because you just can't take that risk when the situation is what it is. And
Brissett too.
Yeah.
I mean, no one's talking about it, but it's that's another guy. He can be pretty important on this team. One injury and he becomes really important on this team out of the camp. So it's a good point. Fact that he had a knee, I'm sure, again, it doesn't sound major at all, but it's if you have anything, if something doesn't if you have a bruise or whatever, right, shut it down. And they did.
Selfishly, I hate that we don't have something to watch here in August. It feels like we've always, we at least watch FIBA for Tice or whatever, but all those years watching.
He looks good, by the way. Get that bio train rolling on that.
So look, we already did it on your pod. We've so for those who don't check out Winning Plays, and that I'm sure there's a lot that are overlapping here. Me and B-Rob have already laid out the roadmap for Daniel Tice and Gordon Hayward to join the Celtics for the stretch run. And then I walked it back and said, no, Gordon Hayward will go to Miami, and somehow we'll see the Heat again in the playoffs, and it's going to be crazy. But Tice is sort of the pipe dream of maybe gets bought out in Indiana and maybe stumbles his way back to Boston and is that extra big for the stretch run. We'll keep that hope alive. The only other thing, but I got one more state of the fan thing for you. But then the only other headline has been this whole Tatum and Dame thing. I can't get myself worked up about it. NBA players talk all the time. I don't think there was anything nefarious here. I think this was just oh, Dame doesn't want to be somewhere. It's a really good player. I should call my friend and see if he wants to be here. And it's still weird that Dame just adamantly does not want to be in Boston, but it's not our headache.
Yeah, I think it's Mark Spears on the report, and I think he was the guy who originally reported back in July too. So I'm sure this was just a conversation that happened months ago at this point. And yeah, this is I don't think if the Celtics could get Damian Lillard without giving up Jaylen Brown, that's certainly a conversation to be had, but that's also not something that's going to happen if he does not want to play here at all. So how this whole situation evolves in the next few months, I guess, is one of the interesting subplots of camp here, certainly from a Celtics perspective, just seeing what happens to Miami there and how long Portland's weight game is. And if any other team decides, okay, we don't like what we see the first few months of the season, we're going to jump in the fray here for Lillard. But I don't think this is something, again, this is the first time, Chris, and there's going to be no massive trade rumors heading into the season involving any of the star players in Celtics. I do think it'll be a busy season from the Celtics from a trade standpoint, but not with the guys at the very top. Yeah,
it's fascinating. Jaylen Brown's going to get 1 year reprieve of all this noise. And that I hope he embraces it. I hope it's nice for him to not have to worry about this stuff. And it's going to be interesting. I in the intro to the pod, I was saying it's been the quietest August I can remember. No Kyrie trade, no re-signings. It's just been kind of okay, Celtics are ready. Let's go. Hopefully. I don't suspect there will be anything about it, but we've talked about it. There's still the potential for them to do something big. It has to all line up, and as you said, it won't involve necessarily their biggest pieces. I want to know this. We ended the month of August at NBC Sports Boston talking a little bit about the state of the fan, and the idea is we went from Loserville when none of these teams won anything to all we do is have parades. And now it's kind of in this weird spot where the Celtics, as chief among them, have not won a title since 2008. They haven't won one title in 30-something years now. And I'm curious from your perspective. You also grew up here. You're a Newton guy, and you were like me. You were probably a Celtic fan growing up, although I probably rooted more for the Magic and Michael Jordan and all that because our team was terrible after Larry Bird and everyone left. But where do you think Celtics fans are at right now? Do you think our expectations irrational? I think there's a year like last year where we get done and people are just so mad that they lost Game 7 on their home court and like seasons of failure. That's probably a little harsh, but like, you know what I mean? Like it's so championship or bust now. Has fandom of the Celtics changed, and where do you think fans are at overall?
I think fans, it's easy to go both ways with, like, in terms of, like, look at the success they've had. Like, they've been in the conference finals like so many times in the last 6-7 years. Like that you don't, like, it's easy to take that part of it for granted.
Which we totally do.
Yeah, which it just 100% happens. And like organizationally, like that's something you can hang your hat on, and you look at the bumps in the road along the way, whether it was like the Kyrie situation or Ime last year, and like there's been a lot of roadblocks there that could have led to a real bad down year, and that really hasn't happened outside of the 2020, like the middle year there where they just got smoked by the Nets in the first round. But to me, at this point, I also think those the high expectations are fair for fans, because you look at the opportunities they've had, whether it was against the Heat in the bubble or against the Heat last year, and it's like, how many more times are we going to talk about like this is a great opportunity, and like they like things couldn't line up for them any better right now, and
they're so young. They're
so young. Oh, guess what? Those contracts, like, you're making $55 million a year now, Jaylen Brown and Tatum, like the flexibility, like you're turning from a up and coming team to some team that needs to, like, you wonder whether this is the right pairing for the long term. And this is like the next 2 years is going to be a pretty big litmus test on that front. So all things considered, I think I have no problem with the high expectations that the fan base has right now, because this group has proven they've earned it. And now with Marcus Smart out of the picture, it's, I think, across the organization, it's kind of handing the car keys to Jayson and Jaylen and kind of seeing what they do with it.
It's fascinating. It's like when I think back to my favorite seasons of the past 10 years, I go to that Isaiah year where, they were sort of no expectations and they completely outkicked them. Even to a point, 2022 was a little bit out of nowhere because it was such a weird year. And then the second half surge and you're like, oh my God, they might actually do this. So it's unique when we go into years where there's like these huge expectations, last year chief among them, and they fall a little bit short. A lot of teams would be like, oh wow, getting to the Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals is a successful season, and it's just not here. But I get that. There's that balance. There's banners, and like ultimately they've set such a high bar that's what they have to do. I do think I still get the sense that Celtics fans are frustrated they haven't gotten to that over that last barrier and to the finish line, but there's a great appreciation for, like, oh my God, besides Brad Stevens' first year, for the better part of the last decade, they've sort of been in the mix, or at least been on the rise towards that part. But like ultimately, it's so weird to say, we're so spoiled, like they gotta win one, or else, like, it would feel like there was that this little stretch came up short.
Who else in Boston is going to get one anytime soon? Like, and you look at the rest of the complexion now, it's like especially if the Pats come slow out of the gate here, like all eyes is going to be on this team, like in a hurry.
The Mac Jones slanders across all platforms. I'm with you though, and like the Bruins are obviously, like, all their veterans are retiring and fading off now. It's gonna be fascinating. I wonder if does that put any extra pressure on the Celtics? Do you think I don't think they feel that. There'll just be a bigger spotlight in terms of the media scrutiny and such.
And I think, during the first couple months of the year, like, Patriots are king coverage wise. So like for a lot, at least in terms of eyeballs, on Sundays. So they won't have as much attention on them there. But if things go awry there and people just turn to the NBA quicker, which this season, which knock on wood, hopefully happens, and for both of us here, then like it's gonna be like they're gonna have a heightened level of scrutiny, and with all the expectations and the contracts, etc., like it's all gonna be there. And Joe Mazzulla is not a rookie anymore. He's had a full off season here. I think there are gonna be a lot of eyes on him, and Porzingis as well. When you take away
Yeah.
a piece like Smart, like the replacement is going to certainly have all eyes on him too.
It's gonna be fascinating, and at least we don't have to ask about the head coach transition or Kyrie's departure. Maybe media day will actually be somewhat enjoyable this year instead of what it's been in recent years. Brian Robb, thank you for jumping on this Emergen-Svi Pod. And let's see, maybe we'll have an emergency Blake pod along the way. It just might take a while, and then we'll get to that. But enjoy the rest of your summer.
Thank you, sir.